you have any technical questions or problems with your viewing or problems with audio, please refer those to the chat box as well, or you can email me. All of that information is up at the top of the chat box. If you scroll up it, it'll have a list of directions and my email. As usual, this program is being recorded and will be emailed to you as soon as it's made available to us. And actually, at the end of each session, we send out an evaluation, and that has a link to our YouTube page where those are being uploaded. Tonight, our presenter is Austin Little. Austin has done soils and, soils. And so this is the second one of this program. He is a University of Illinois Extension Horticulture Educator for Southern Illinois. He covers Jackson, Franklin, Williamson, Randolph, and Perry County. With that, I will let Austin take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. So, as Maggie said, tonight is the installment of the Beginning Gardener series on plant nutrition. And so in this session, I will be going over how plants take up and use nutrients to grow, what kinds of fertilizer and nutrients plants need, and how to apply these nutrients to soil if we have time. It's as always, this is a lot of material to go over, so we'll get started here. So let's start with the basics, and this might seem a little elementary to start with, but it's important to start with the basics of environmental needs, or what are also called cultural requirements for plants, because these are the things they need to be successful and to be healthy. So plants need adequate space for roots and foliage. They need access to high enough temperatures and enough light for that specific species to be successful and to complete its life cycle. They need water and air available to the roots in the soil in the right balance and at the right times. And most importantly, today what we're looking at is nutrients. So adequate nutrient availability is really important for healthy and productive plants. And healthy plants are going to be better at withstanding stresses, environmental stresses or disease stresses. And if we're growing plants for food, then hopefully with the right nutrient management, which is kind of the focus here. So plant nutrition is also part of plant or nutrient management. So hopefully we'll get a decent yield, a decent return out of all of these inputs. So I think it's important to talk about how plants take up nutrients, how these mechanisms work. So once a seedling breaks dormancy and starts to germinate, it's using up all of the nutrients and energy stores, carbohydrates that are stored in the seed by pushing up and creating above ground vegetation that can now start to switch over and start to be used to start generating energy through photosynthesis for its metabolic activity. So as the metabolic activity and cellular production starts to ramp up in the cells, so does the creation of secondary and tertiary feeder roots. And I'm not sure I'm looking at the slide that I thought I was, but that's okay. So what we're seeing here is the basic mechanism for how plants create energy, and that is through photosynthesis here. So plants absorb nutrients primarily through their roots. And this process is directly tied to photosynthesis. So as this metabolic activity starts to increase, roots start to take up nutrients and solutions out of the soil at a higher rate as this metabolic activity and creating of tissues is going on in the above ground portions of the plant. And we can see here, this is the basic chemical reaction for photosynthesis. So it takes carbon dioxide plus water and light. That'd be the catalyst here. And we get glucose and oxygen out of that. So I was talking about feeder roots here just a moment ago. So what we see here in this diagram is a closer look at feeder roots. So we have kind of the main tap roots, our secondary roots, and tertiary roots. And on the tertiary roots are mainly going to be where we find our fine root hairs or rootlets. And that is where that's the interface between the plant and the soil solution, where all of this chemical interaction and interchange is happening. So feeder roots are microscopic root hairs that take up the macro and micronutrients, and we'll get into macro and micronutrients here. But those are going to be the things that we may have heard about, and that's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and our micronutrients like manganese or calcium, these kind of things. And mostly these are taken up in the form of soluble salts out of the soil solution. So these feeder roots, just to illustrate, they live about 10 days generally and are about 100 per millimeter of tertiary root or parent root. So they're extremely dense, and this enables a greater surface area and contact with the soil solution. So inside the cells of the roots, there's a higher concentration of mineral solutes than there is in the outside, in the soil solution outside of the roots surrounding the plant. And so this creates an osmotic imbalance. So this is through osmotic pressure or root pressure that forces water up and out of the root in the xylem, which is the vascular system that carries nutrients from the roots up through the plant to the rest of the plant, to its different tissues and parts. So as it moves through the xylem, it creates a pressure differential or a vacuum. So it causes these nutrients to then be pulled out of the soil solution. So as roots are taking up nutrients, they are at the same time releasing or exuding compounds. So these are amino acids, sugars, and other molecules into the soil to help fix nutrients for uptake and to have a symbiotic relationship with the biotic or microbial populations in the soil that help fix the nutrients which roots are in search of. And we're also here, we have a diagram of the Calvin cycle. And I just wanted to show this. We won't spend very much time on it. This is the main chemistry mechanism which plants use to convert sunlight and environmental resources into energy. So this is this chemical cycle, energy cycle, that out of which we get glucose, and that's the main energy compound that plants are producing, which then they use for every cellular kind of activity, converted into storage for carbohydrates, cellular production. So that's kind of the fuel there. That's that mechanism or process. So let's take a look at our list of macro and micronutrients. So our structural nutrients are going to be kind of the building blocks of the matter in plants. That's carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Those are just out there in the world. And then we have our macronutrients. So these are our major nutrients that are needed in the highest amounts. That's why they're macronutrients. And they're the big popular ones. It's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, N, P, and K. And then we have our secondary nutrients that are also just as important, but needed in much smaller percentages, much smaller amounts. And those are calcium, magnesium, sulfur, things like that. And then we have micronutrients. So there's all our micronutrients, and those are often not the most limiting nutrients. So the more limiting nutrients are going to be secondary or major nutrients, macronutrients. And sulfur is one that you could even, some people say it should be in the macronutrient category. It's a very important nutrient for cellular function and formation of chlorophyll. So let's talk about NP and K here to a little bit more detail. Nitrogen is the most popular nutrient, macronutrient that everybody's. It's the one that we've all seen and are aware of, I think. So it's the most frequently deficient nutrient. Plants contain between 1 and 5% nitrogen by weight, and it is absorbed out of the soil solution primarily as nitrates and ammonium. So the vast majority of nutrients are taken up by roots, which is mostly what we're talking about. So we're really talking about the soil root interface here, and nutrient management is just as much about the plant as it is the soil. So this is really about soil and plant health as well. There are nutrients that can be absorbed through foliar application, but we're mostly going to talk about feeding soil to feed our plants. And so plants take up ammonium or nitrate. Those are the two forms of nitrogen that plants take up through the roots. So nitrogen is essential because it's essential in transport chains of photosynthesis. So it's one of these elements that carry energy. They're an energy carrier. And also essential in building blocks of amino acids, proteins, and cellular structures. So ammonium, or NH4 is the chemical name, is easily available to plants for uptake, but it has to be converted to ammonia or NO3 as it's assimilated, because NH4 or ammonium is actually toxic to plants at the cellular level. So it has to be converted. It can take it up, but it takes more work to convert it to ammonia or to convert it to nitrate, which then can be assimilated in cells into the other materials. So organic nitrogen is not the same, and not to be confused with organic fertilizers, such as animal byproducts or compost, these kind of things. We call these things organic, but this is referring to organic nitrogen, and in the context of chemistry is referring to organic nitrogen because it has a carbon group. So in organic chemistry, anything with a carbon group is termed organic, whereas nitrate and ammonium are considered inorganic because they don't have that carbon group. So a little bit of background on nitrogen, and then quickly we'll look at this fun diagram here. So nitrogen fixing bacteria use enzymes to either excrete, or when they die, they release ammonium, and soil fixing bacteria, nitrogenase, convert that to nitrate, which then can be taken up. Most annual kind of produce, kind of market kind of garden plants prefer nitrate because, again, it's easier to process. So that is the nitrogen cycle there. Okay, phosphorus. Phosphorus is important for root growth, establishment of root zones, seed production, cell division, and creating new tissues. So it's called the most limiting nutrient in soils or in plant systems. And although most agricultural soils tend to have pretty good amounts of inorganic and organic phosphorus, these are immobilized or kind of tightly bound up in the soil and are available in lower concentrations. So while there may be a lot of phosphorus in the system, it's not in an available form to plants. And this is because of the slow processing of phosphorus, how the phosphorus cycle has to go through immobilizations, mineralizations, desorption, adsorption, and it's a time intense process. So it's it needs to be there at the right time. And plants contain up to 0.5% by weight, and it's absorbed as the P2O5 ions, depending on pH. So pH also plays a big role in phosphorus uptake. So common forms of phosphorus are rock phosphate, wood ash, again, which will lower pH. Bone meal, manures, vermicompost is also a good source of phosphorus. And here we see what a big impact with this rice plant that phosphorus has. Okay, so now potassium. Plants contain about 5% potassium by weight, and it is absorbed as cations, potassium oxide. So it's used as chloroplast, enzyme activity, translocation of sugars, glucose. Also, it plays a major role in regulating the opening and closing of stomates or stomata. And those are small openings or apertures on leaves, on the underside of leaves that regulate gas and water retention. When it's hot out, they close up. When it's cooler, they open for respiration. So potassium is also known as the quality nutrient, or the quiet quality nutrient, because it's one that people don't, or that we don't think of as a critical nutrient, but it does play a big role. And it comes in the flavors or forms here of potassium chloride, potassium sulfate, and potassium nitrate. And kind of going back here just to revisit pH of soil, most of our garden or landscape plants are going to be happy somewhere between 6 to 7. Soils in Illinois range from extremes of pretty low acidity to high acidity, but what's ideal is going to be around 6 to 7 for most things. Now, there are some things that prefer it a little bit more acidic, such as blueberries, and that, could be low or high 5 range, 5.8, something like that, 6. They'd be happier there for the nutrients that they take up. Okay, so, and again, revisiting how the degree of pH impacts availability of nutrients. So this is just to illustrate that. And also looking at just a real general recommendation on how to raise or lower pH. Now, this is all going to be informed or directed by a soil sample or soil analysis. So we need this information to start figuring out how to change our soil. So this is where we start. This is the starting point. So taking a sample should be done in spring before planting or in fall. So a reason to sample in fall is if we're going to look at liming to raise our pH. It's recommended to try to apply lime in the fall when the freezing and thawing helps to absorb lime deeper into the soil and start to raise that pH over winter. So we want to take a soil sample, but we should always try to get a soil sample before adding costly inputs like fertilizer, so that we know the amount and what we need, so that we're not putting in something that we don't need or too much of something. So depending on the size of the site, we want to take a representative sample from the site of interest. And so this is a soil core sampler. And you don't have to have one of these, but they are pretty handy to take these soil cores down to about 6 inches, and you can take about 5 or so depending on the size. It just depends on the size of your garden or the site. If it's like 100 square foot, maybe just take 5 or 6 random cores and mix them in a container together. And then just from that, take like an aggregate sample, a couple ounces, that's really all you need, and send it off to your soil lab, and be mindful of taking wet samples. You want to wait till the soil is drained a little bit so you can mix it up and get a clearer picture. So now this is a example of just a generic example of a garden soil sample. And this is a more graphical sample than or analysis than what you may get, but I'm just using this as an example because it kind of clearly shows what we're looking for in a soil sample, and it shows us our target area here. So let's look at our total N in this sample, and it tells us down here in parts per million. So total N here it gives us our range of ideally between 20 and 30 parts per million. And this sample is pretty low. So that's one that we're really going to have to look at improvement before we go and plant our garden. Phosphorus is pretty good. And again, most home lawns and yards, if you're thinking about starting a garden, phosphorus is usually going to be the one you don't need a lot of. And that has to do with years of turf growing there. If it's ever been fertilized, that phosphorus hangs around. So it's usually not one that is lacking. Potassium is okay, but might need to do a little bit of a amendment, and everything else is okay here. Micronutrients, maybe we need some form of root stimulator that has some micronutrients or some kind of micronutrient mix. But up here it gives us our application rates. So this would be for a small garden, right? And this is telling us we need 21 pounds or 0.75 pounds of nitrogen per 100 square feet, and they're recommending it at a 2100. So this is the fertilizer analysis, which we'll talk about momentarily. This is for potassium. So this is NPK, and this is 60 pounds per product of whatever fertilizer product we're going to use, and we need 0.75 pounds per square foot. So it even tells us if we're going to use organic, what recommendation they would have to start amending our soil to reach these N and K levels. So they're recommending a 101, and that's if we're using compost. Most compost is 111, somewhere in there. So this is really helpful. This is going to give us a baseline for what we may want to add to our garden. Now let's talk about conventional fertilizers. So conventional or synthetic fertilizers are man-made, and the nutrients are available in a chemical form that are quickly available to plants. So nutrients are released, taken up by plants. If they're not used in a timely way, then they're leached out of the system or can be tied up in the soil solution. So generally with conventionals, there's quick release and then slow release. So the slow release are artificially slow release by having some kind of polymer or sulfur coating that over time breaks down and kind of like a slow release, gel, a slow release Tylenol or something like that. It slowly releases and makes nutrients available. So let's talk about a quick look at application rates and how to do kind of a back of the envelope calculation here. So let's say we have a fertilizer bag of 50 pounds of 5-10-10, and again that's going to be our analysis. So that's telling us there's 5% in this product. 5% of this 50 pounds is nitrogen, 10% is phosphorus, and 10% is potassium, among with maybe some other materials, carriers, things like that in this 50-pound bag. So the the pounds of nitrogen within this 50-pound bag. If it's 5%, that's 2.5 pounds of nitrogen. 10% will be 5 pounds of phosphorus and 5 pounds of potassium per bag. And typical recommendations for kind of the home landscape are 100 to 1,000 square feet. Now, a lot of times with soil samples coming from soil labs, they're going to be geared towards agronomic applications. So they might be in acres or even hectares sometimes. So we need to kind of scale that down for the context of the home gardener. And so those rates are going to be impractical for a small market garden or a small herb garden or something along those lines. And sometimes the products that are recommended are impractical for the home application. So they may be recommending urea, which is an agronomic form of nitrate, and it does come in forms formulated for home use, but you probably aren't going to be going to the farm supply and saying, I need 10 pounds of urea. So we're thinking in terms of kind of the scale of the home gardener. And with that, the recommendation is it's generally avoided to apply more than 10 pounds per 100 square feet of nitrate, so that we're not over applying or causing fertilizer burn, which is basically salt burn, or applying too much that's not going to be usable for our plants and ends up being leached into the environment. So instead, what we're looking at is using lower applications maybe a few times over the growing season instead of all at once. Okay, so let's look at our garden here. We have a 350 square foot produce garden with maybe some fruits and vegetables. So how many bags of fertilizer do we need? Real quick, we take our square footage here, our area of our garden, divided by the 100 square feet of our application rate, because we know we need 1 pound per 100 square feet. So that gives us 3.5. We take 3.5 times 1 pound, and that gives us 3.5 pounds of total N that we're going to need for this application. Or sorry, this is, 3.5 pounds of total N for this application. And so we take 3.5 divided by the pounds per bag of this product that we're looking at, and that tells us that we need 1.5 or 1.4 to 1.5 of the 50-pound bags of 5, 10, 10 to get our total N application here. So maybe because it's 1.5 bags, there's a bigger bag that we could buy, or maybe a different concentration that we can then do this calculation for and convert that to what we need. So that's just the basic arithmetic there to figure out. But if you've got a smartphone, you can probably find a fertilizer application rate calculator. But it's nice to know how to do it. So let's talk about different types of fertilizers here. And again, for nitrogen, calcium nitrate is a bit more of an agronomic form, same as ammonium nitrate, ureas, but these are going to be mixed in with the Miracle Grows and the osmocotes and things such as that. Phosphorus, superphosphate, diammonium or rock phosphate, and potassium there. Again, potassium nitrate with our nitrate in there. Calcium is going to come again in lime, hydrated lime, gypsum, or calcium nitrate. And then kind of looking at our secondary and micronutrients here. So these are the chemical forms that they're going to be coming in. All right, types of fertilizer. So we kind of talked about the conventional. Let's look at organic types of fertilizer. Those are going to be primarily manure, compost, or animal byproducts. So with organic fertilizers, the nutrients are released through competition or competing or respiration, competition over resources from the soil biotic community, bacteria, fungi, amoebas, microbes, nematodes. These are all competing for soil nutrients from organic matter, but in a balanced way. So when these things are in balance, one thing is feeding on another and creating available nutrients for plants. So in a natural system without human input, plants naturally create these nutrients that are available, but within balance of that particular ecosystem or environment. And they only produce what they need to produce seed. So we have to modify the system and really kind of take advantage in some ways. But with organic manures and organic fertilizers, we're using nature's own processes a little bit more than we do with synthetic. With synthetic, it's just kind of pure inputs, and we do need the microbes there, but we're not really too focused on the microbes. It's more pumping materials into the root zone for immediate uptake. So the organic fertilizer is a bit of the long game. This is takes a little bit more time, but over time it starts to kind of snowball and start to be a little bit more of a self-sustaining system. So that's why we tend to categorize organic fertilizers as more sustainable, because they tend to sustain themselves longer. So it takes time to assimilate and start to return these nutrients through this microbial activity. And with manures, nitrogen can be tied up for some time, and it could be that you get 30 to 50% availability in the first year, depending on the microbial populations that you have, depending on the form of manure, on the nitrogen to carbon ratio, and whatever materials we're using. So it's just building over time, building fertility and health over time. So some examples are composted animal manure, spent mushroom compost, which is derived from horse manure, lawn and yard compost or kitchen compost that we make at home, bone meal, blood meal, fish emulsions, animal byproducts are all examples of organic fertilizers. Compost tea is a solution that we get out of compost, and it's slow release again. So thinking of the difference between organics and conventionals, it's really quick release versus slow release, to simplify it. And with compost tea, it's really more about inoculating the soil with microbes, because this compost tea is full of microbes, beneficial plant growth regulators, and fungi. And so it's more about inoculating and boosting this process of nutrient conversion to make the more plant available. And I have cover crops here, but I'm going to cover that on Tuesday when Katie and I present on succession and companion planting. I think that might fit in with my talk on Tuesday. So real quick, this is just to show the heavy, we hear things are heavy feeders or light feeders. So in the context of nitrogen, low feeders are things like peas and melons and some greens. Medium is going to be beans, peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, tomatoes. High feeders are cauliflower, potatoes, cucurbits sometimes, onions, carrots, cabbage. And then with phosphorus, we have low feeder or kind of light feeders are going to be carrots, beets, radish, kind of cool season things. Medium would be onions, corn, spinach, lettuce, and high phosphorus feeders are tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cabbage, and broccoli, cucumbers, and squash. Okay, so let's talk about how and when to apply these fertilizers. So different methods that we can use or practices to apply fertilizers. So something to note, that applying conventional fertilizers too early can cause, and again, this is due to the fact that it's quick release, so it can cause leaching, or we can lose, it can volatilize. So the nitrates can volatilize into the environment, or we can lose it to microbial activity if we're plowing and activating soil microbes and getting them in contact with organic matter. They eat that up. Now they're going to eat up our fertilizer. So the amounts to be determined and the rates, we're not really going to talk too much about rates, because that is really going to be defined by our soil test. So that's why we need that soil test to know the rates and recommendations. Generally, conventional fertilizers are best applied in spring, sometime before planting. It depends on, if it's a slow release conventional, then you can apply it pretty much when you plant. But for quick release, you may want to apply it a couple days before, just so that it has time to kind of spread out and absorb in the soil, and it's not too concentrated around roots, which could cause fertilizer burn. So pre-application is generally the guideline, but that's going to be different for the specific plant. For instance, when I've done my research on peppers and melons, the general guideline is we apply at planting our amendments, and then we do a side dress at when it flowers. So that's just one basic guideline at the minimum. And for some crops, it might be less than that. It might be that you do more applications than that. So applying granular fertilizers, that can be done by broadcasting with a spreader or hand spreading, or you can also side dress with granular fertilizers, and they need to be lightly mixed into the soil. So when we're thinking about gardens and produce gardens especially, or even perennials, we're looking at side dressing generally. So for a market garden or a produce garden, what we're talking about really is how many ounces per feet of row are we applying, and the general practice is going to be side dressing, where we're applying these fertilizers around the base of the root, where the root zone is going to be, so it gets contact with that root zone. So organic nutrients should be mixed into the soil, and that's so that they get that contact and interaction with soil microbes. For quick release fertilizers, we should be, like a quick release conventional fertilizer especially, it's best if we're using transplants to go ahead and install those transplants and then wait 2 to even 3 weeks to allow the roots to establish and get over any kind of shock and adjustments that they have to, or kind of acclimation, so that we don't stress out those transplants even further. So with quick release, like a liquid conventional, it's best to give it some time to adjust and adapt. Okay, so fertigation. Here we see a kind of a grainy picture from Florida of a fertigation system. So this probably won't be too important for small scale, like a small scale garden or backyard garden. But if we're talking about a little bit larger agronomic or specialty crop production, then a lot of times they're looking at setting up a fertigation system that's run through their irrigation system. So a fertigation system is basically it's a pre-calibrated rate of a concentrated fertilizer that's pumped into the irrigation system, and then this it might be applied at every watering, or maybe they're applying it every couple of weeks, And it's a great way to apply things like fish emulsion or organic fertilizers, which I've seen them do out at the organic farm at SIU. So, but that might be a little bit more for a larger production. Okay, and real quick, I wanted to mention no-till sheet gardening. So in this process, this might be on paper. In concept, it's pretty simple. And so we're applying a thick layer of compost, but we need processed, conditioned compost that is ready to go. It's got its nutrient availability, it's got its microbes. So we're looking at applying 3 to 4 inches of compost over cardboard. So that cardboard is to suppress the underground vegetation below that. And then we're basically just planting into the compost. So the idea is that that cardboard breaks down, the roots are able to then expand down into the soil without the weed issues, and we have our built-in nutrient source there and soil conditioning source. But it gets a little more complicated than that, because what if we have hard clay soil underneath this? So we get to a point where these fine roots are basically hitting a dead end. So it is a little bit more complicated than just putting large amounts of compost on top of cardboard. You may need to be doing some composting underneath of that as well. But this does kind of solve a lot of the issues of adding fertilizers and trying to mitigate weeds. So it kind of checks those issues. But it's definitely something interesting to look into. So these are some rates, some more specific rates for some really popular plants. So for tomato, we're looking at 1 pound of 3300. So this would be like urea. And so we're applying 1 to 2 weeks before first tomato ripens, and then 2 weeks after picking first ripe tomato, 1 month later. Potatoes, 1.5 pounds per 100-foot row, apply after tuber formation starts. So these are just to give you a better idea of how it's not a one recommendation fits all. It's going to be different for different species. Are going to have similar recommendations for things. Pepper in the solanaceous family, it's going to be similar. So we can get a little bit better idea between the different families of plants. They may have similar needs. And some other general info to talk about quickly here. Composting is more about feeding the microbial activity, which then unlocks these unavailable nutrients that are tied up in inorganic forms in the soil. So it's really about creating a more diverse soil environment, a more diverse soil food web, because generally, just as far as just basic flat out nutrient content, they're not high in nutrient content, but what they're doing is creating available nutrients in the soil over time. Vermicomposting, worm castings is what that is, and those levels can be a bit higher, especially for phosphorus. So it can have really good amounts of available phosphorus in vermicomposting. So you can mix vermicompost in with your other manures and compost as well to give it a microbial boost. Vermicompost often has a high amount of beneficial microbes, fungi, and plant growth regulators. Quick word about soilless media products here. They sometimes have fertilizers and microbes built into the recipe there. So like the high-end things for container gardening, like Fox Farm, these kind of things, they're going to be pretty expensive. You're looking at $50, $60 per bag, but they oftentimes have fertilizers and microbes that can feed a plant for up to 3 months. So if that's something you're interested in, might look into the soilless media products that are kind of built in, all in one. And then seed starting fertilizers, we're not really wanting to put anything heavy duty on seeds. So 1-1-1 or 1-2-1 or even a root stimulator product is good for seed starting. And some resources here for you to look at and to do further research. The Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education website has all kinds of educational materials for different crops. It's mostly geared towards more organic or sustainable practices. But if you're looking for, say you want to look at how to start small-scale organic tomato production, they've got tons of resources on it. So if you got some time, go ahead and give it a look. And then we have our Illinois Vegetable Garden Guide here, and I can show you that real quick. So this is the U of I extension source here, and great resource, kind of goes through a little bit of what we talked about and much, much more. So if you got some extra time on your hands, which most of us do, I think right now, it might be a fun way to kill some time. And I think that wraps up my slides. So thank you for spending another hour listening to me. And if there's any questions about plant health and plant nutrition, let's address that.
All right. Thank you, Austin. And I do have quite a few questions.
Oh, good.
Okay, so one was about where do you send soil samples to be tested? I do have, I have sent the link that's on our U of I page of all the different places in Illinois and a few in like Indiana and Ohio. It's gone there. I'm going to be sending that out with the evaluation email, but if you have anything to add to that, Austin.
The ones that I've personally used that we use at our office are Southern Illinois Ag Solutions. They're local. And for other research that I've done, I've used Brookside Labs in Ohio. And okay. I would recommend either of those. Soil or Southern Illinois Ag Solutions is a bit more for agronomic. So is Brookside Labs. Brookside Labs is going to have a more detailed analysis, but just for basics like nitrogen, your basic macro and micronutrients, you'll get what you need with the Southern Illinois Ag Solutions. But if you're looking for a little bit more intensive kind of information, then I would maybe say Brookside.
Okay. Oh, and there was a note that the Soil Ag Solutions, that website actually on this list I'm going to send out does not work. They actually go exclusively through their Facebook now. So yep. I think if you just Google that. Okay. Okay. So next question is, if your soil sample says micronutrient is too low, like for example, manganese, how do you calculate how much to add for a micro?
Well, same way you would calculate, what you need with your macronutrients. It's just going to depend on the percentage that's in the product. It depends on the product, the analysis of that product. And so, yeah, you'll just have to figure out basically the same way, looking at the percentage that's in that product, what you need, and the rate that you need. So it's going to be pretty much the same way as we talked about with macros, just kind of converted for whatever nutrient it is you're amending. Okay.
The next question is, my garden is only about 2.5 by 6 feet. If you send a soil sample in, how will I know what to use to put on my garden since I only need small amounts? And I know you kind of did touch on, or you talked about that, but if maybe you want to give a quick explanation.
Right. So yeah, with rates at that small of an amount, what we're talking about maybe instead of pounds would be ounces. So again, it's a conversion that you need to do. So on say a bag of, bag of Miracle Grow or Osmocote is going to tell you how many pounds you need for, 25 feet or 100 square feet. So basically it's just, a bit of a conversion where we're saying, well, 2 by 6, so 12 or 15 feet, just dividing that, and then dividing, there's 16 ounces in a pound. So maybe our rates or our measurements that we're using, we're just changing the measurements. So that's how I've done it, using small amounts. Yeah, if you're growing a 5-foot row of something, you're not looking at pounds, you're looking at ounces or tablespoons even of something.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. How does using horse manure affect the planting site?
Well, horse manure, one kind of caveat is any kind of animal manures need to be, if they're going to be applied to some kind of food crop, they need to be applied early, like 3 weeks or a month before it's going to be harvested, to kind of avoid any kind of salmonella or things like that, to give it time to break down. And ideally, it shouldn't be that hot anyway, or unprocessed. It really should be pretty much processed by the time it goes into the garden or field. But just applying top dressing horse manure, I forget the exact ratio of carbon to nitrogen, but it's higher than something like chicken manure. So it's got more carbon to nitrogen, which means it doesn't have as much of a nitrogen component. So it's a little bit slower to break down into usable nutrients. But it's, if you have it, I would say use it. Maybe mix in some other kind of nutrient in there with it to kind of boost it. Some compost tea, something like that, or chicken manure. But as far as organic manures, it is a little bit, what you could say, slower release than like the chicken manure, which would be considered hot, because it's got more available or more nitrogen that's available to the microbes.
Okay. Also on the subject of horse manure, someone had mentioned weed seeds in manures and it being a problem when they've spread it on their garden. I'm guessing they've done it fresh, but if it's composted all the way, it shouldn't be too bad.
So, right. And that's just kind of down to, again, fully composted materials. It needs to get up to, 100 some degrees, so that you can start to suppress those seeds, or just kind of neutralize any kind of weed seeds in there. So it has to get up with hot composting, which I'm planning on doing a class on here in a couple weeks. We definitely go into that. So getting the temperatures up will kill off and neutralize weed seeds, any kind of harmful pathogens in there as well, by getting that microbial activity to raise those temperatures. It should neutralize and remove a lot of those problems. So that's one thing about putting fresh manure out is, you're going to have some issues with that.
Okay. How does peat moss affect soil as a soil amendment?
Peat moss is an organic material, and it is used a lot for more acid-loving plants like azaleas, rhododendrons, evergreen, broadleaf evergreens, and blueberries. That's something very commonly recommended for blueberries. So it tends to be acid create or contribute to acidic pH, lowers pH a little bit, but it's really awesome for being able to hold water and also increase water percolation. So it's a good material to add if you have a little bit of a higher pH, say, and you want to improve your drainage and water holding capacity, or field capacity. But there's lots of other things that behave like peat moss, like spent rice hulls or cotton material from the cotton harvesting process. Compost kind of does the same thing, but moss is really exceptional for its water holding capacity, drainage, and also it reduces acidity. However, the one drawback with peat moss is that if it gets really bone dry, it's very difficult to get it to hold water again. It takes a long time for it to reabsorb water.
Okay. We had a few questions on compost tea. One question was, is it safe for vegetable gardens? And two was kind of like, did you have any recipes for it?
Well, what you're doing with compost tea is you're taking like a cheesecloth or some kind of permeable bag of some type, or some sort of filter, where you're soaking your compost. So it needs to be finished compost, and you're soaking it in water to help create a really rich, dense microbial population. So with compost tea, it's not so much about the nutrient content. It's more about, think of it as an inoculum for your microbes. That's really what compost tea is for. So it's something you would probably want to apply with your organic fertilizers in combination. So when you go to apply your compost, manures, these kind of things, adding in an application or two of compost tea is the way to go with that. Or you could even, if you were doing a liquid kind of organic fertilizer, mixing it in with your liquid fertilizer applications. So it's kind of a booster.
Okay. Do you use a starter fertilizer with a high phosphorus at the time of planting?
Well, for turf, that's what they use in turf management for seed starters for lawns, is something with like low nitrogen but super high phosphorus. And I haven't done that myself. One of the issues is some places you're not even allowed to use high phosphorus seed starters or fertilizers like that, because there's a big issue with phosphorus, toxic phosphorus runoff in water, which creates some environmental problems. So, I mean, I know that it is a practice, but for seed starting, generally, I think you're good with, just a really kind of low analysis kind of thing. Maybe something like a root stimulator that's got a lot of microbes and bacteria, or even micronutrients in there. So as far as high phosphorus, I'm going to say it's up to the user.
Okay. What is your recommendation on the addition of a mycorrhizae amendment and planting time?
So it depends on the kind of plant. If it's a perennial, like a woody perennial, woody perennials tend to benefit from arbuscular mycorrhiza. So that's the mycorrhiza that associates with the outside of roots. But if it's a annual with kind of a more kind of herbaceous kind of growth habit, an annual kind of market garden thing, those are going to associate more with endomycorrhiza. So those are going to associate more with mycorrhizal species that associate with the inside of the cells of the roots. And yeah, absolutely. There's research out there showing that it does make a big difference. Pretty much every plant species has a symbiotic beneficial relationship with either one or more species of mycorrhiza. So plants use mycorrhiza to to get a hold of nutrients in the soil that are less available to them, and the mycorrhiza in turn get some sugars or something, some kind of product from the plants. And it's one of these things where the more we learn about it, the more we realize it's kind of a critical part of the whole ecosystem. So there definitely are microbial inoculums. There's wettable powders, granular kind of things, and you can apply these to the roots. You can do like a dip or a soak, or you can apply it to when you're installing your plants, mix it in with the water that you use to irrigate when you water in your plants. But I'd say go for it.
All right. So someone asked, how does Miracle-Gro change fertilizer calculations?
Yeah, it's just the rate, it's the rate on the bag. I haven't had it memorized, but different products are going to have different rates. So for instance, fertilizers that are geared towards fruit trees are going to have like 20, 10, 10. Generally though, those kind of garden fertilizers are going to be like 10, 10, 10, or somewhere around that 12s, as far as the percentage of analysis. So it just has to do with the rate. Check on the bag. It's going to have some instructions back there that say for a 25 or 100-foot square garden, this much per this for this area. So Miracle-Gro might be a little different than another product, but it just has, and it has to do with what you're growing. So it's kind of that due diligence of looking into specifically. So I'm growing asparagus. Asparagus takes different fertilizer requirements than tomatoes, So kind of it's those three things that you kind of have to look at there to come up with that answer.
Okay. A person has started a garden bed at a new site. They dug down about 6 inches and they hit a lot of coal. What does that say about amendments? And also what should or should not be planted there?
Did you say coal?
Yeah. I know from personal experience, my house has coal all around it because there was a coal chute in the basement.
Oh yeah.
I plant everything. I find it every once in a while, and I have never had any problems, but I don't know if you have anything to recommend with coal being in the same ground you're planting your vegetables.
Well, I mean, coal is just carbon, right? So
yeah, that's what.
I guess the issue, I haven't really run into that myself, but I guess the issue is if it might be difficult for microbial activity to really get full speed because there's no nitrogen content there. It's just there's a carbon sink. So I don't know. I mean, I might maybe try to mix that up with like a soil fork if you get that, and try to loosen that up and try to get some organic matter down into it. That would be my first thought, as opposed to doing like a deep tilling or something.
Okay.
Cause more problems. But I would say try to loosen it up, get it opened up a little bit with like a soil fork, and try to get some organic matter down there.
Okay. Is no-till sheet gardening used for transplants or for direct seeding?
Either one. You can direct plant into the compost, or you could direct seed. So it works for both.
All right. I have a new gardener that said they just started building their raised beds and they put down 3 inches of mushroom compost and about 6 inches of topsoil. Should they add anything else?
So is the compost on top of the soil, maybe?
Yeah. Or they have
like
mushroom compost, then topsoil.
Well, the topsoil, it might be, if you didn't do a soil analysis, you might want to see if you could get a soil test to see if because it depends on what's in the soil. So that's why if you don't know and you're thinking, well, maybe I can push it along a little bit, it's best to use organic material, organic fertilizers, because again, they're slow release. So it wouldn't hurt to put some compost on top. But if you did a soil sample or a soil analysis, it would tell you what you could, what needs amending and what might need, or what, maybe there's too much of something in there already. So you want to be careful there by putting in more on top of something that's already too much. So a pH too, just doing a pH test might be important too. And that, that could give you some useful information.
Okay.
Generally, adding compost or some composted manure, compost tea, it's not going to hurt anything.
Okay. Is there any home testing tools available that you'd recommend? I'm guessing for soil testing.
There's not really for nitrates. Nitrates, it's a little bit more of a complex lab test, and even those, there's still, figuring out how those work. Nitrates are a bit more complicated, but definitely for phosphorus, potassium, pH, those kind of things. The pH tests are fine. I mean, it's just a litmus test basically, and the phosphorus and potassium tests are really accurate, and it just changes the color of the water, and then you match that to a color coded key, and it tells you what's in there, and then ideal rates. So there's tons of those on the market at the garden center, and they all pretty much work about the same way. But if you're looking for nitrates, that's going to take a lab analysis.
Okay. Do most home builders strip the rich soil before building? I'm guessing for like new development sites.
Well, definitely construction has a pretty severe impact on soil, and I think builders, maybe some, are becoming more environmentally aware of that and trying. It depends on who's building it. Also, if it involves a basement, in practice, in kind of historical practices, they would just take all that kind of inert clay, understory parent material, parent soil, or kind of soil that's pretty much microbially inactive, and then just spread it out in the yard, and then plant grass into it. And then years down the road, people wonder why my soil is compacted, and well, it's because it's backfill that they took out of, down to 12 feet or whatever, and then just spread it out over the lawn. But if it's had 30 years or so, or whatever, 50 years to rebuild, then you do end up with topsoil after a while. It comes down to how compacted they how much heavy equipment they used, and if they tried to amend the soil at all. So a lot of factors go into that. It just really depends.
Okay. Why do some people use saved coffee grounds? Are there any benefits to that?
Coffee grounds, good carbon to nitrogen ratio. So they're a good carbon source, or nitrogen source for your compost. So
okay.
Nitrogen coffee grounds are good.
Okay, and someone also was like, also to that question, how about eggshells?
Oh, eggshells, those are a good source of calcium, I think. Yeah. I think that's the idea with eggshells.
Okay. This is about dried commercial manures like chicken, and then even like a mushroom compost. This person said that they used both of these that they had bought, and they pretty much just grew a garden full of weeds. And so they were wondering, do they usually contain weeds, or is there just maybe that's what they got?
It's probably what they got. I mean, it goes back to how hot the compost got, and maybe it's not fully, maybe it wasn't fully composted yet. It might still be a little bit fresh or hot. It depends on the source of where it's coming from. Sometimes you get compost that's really nice. For a project, we got some compost that had boards in it, nails, garbage. It had, I think, horse hooves in it or something. And obviously it was pretty fresh, but it was left out for a year to weather, and now it's like this fine granular product that you'd spend some money on. So a lot of that has to do with how new this stuff is, and whether it reached temperatures to be able to kill those things off. But it depends on the source.
Okay. And that is the last question we had. So thank you, Austin.
Good questions.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm getting ready to send out that email with the evaluation. Also, it contains information for our next program for next week, and if you need to register for that, you still can. Also, it's not going to be with this email, but eventually we will send out the email for the composting program that Austin will be doing in the beginning of May. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.